Well, hello there, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to my astrology Twitch stream. My name is Astrology, and I am here tonight to talk about a really interesting chart that someone that's been very in the news of late. This is the chart of Alysa Liu. Alysa is, oh, hi, Lauren, how are you? Nice to have you aboard. Alysa Liu is someone who is a recent U.S. Olympic gold medal winner. She is a figure skater. I think that it's probably rare that you haven't heard of her before. The idea is that we're going to talk about her chart tonight. And before I forget, happy Eclipse Day, everyone. Today we have a lunar eclipse over the axis of Virgo and Pisces, so I hope you're all doing okay. Sometimes with lunar eclipses, things get a little bit too emotional, and so I would hopefully you're not too anxious or nervous today. Sometimes eclipses can do that. So, in any case, hope you're hanging in there. Back to Ms. Liu. So her chart is very interesting, and I have a couple things to say about it before we start. So, the first caveat with this chart is that Alysa Liu does not have a published birth time that I know of. I've looked at some of the work that other astrologers have done. No one seems to have a birth time for Alysa. And that's fine. We will certainly be able to tell quite a bit from just the chart we have. But as you'll notice in this chart, the time that I've used is 12 p.m. So typically for astrologers, if we do not have the birth time for a person, but we have the day. Hi, One True Cripple. Thanks for lurking while you were working. I am grateful for that. But yes, thank you. Appreciate that. One of the things you have to understand is that when we don't have a birth time, there are a number of things we can't really look at. So, for example, we can't really look at the houses. The houses are not in play here because we don't have any place to begin and end them. So you'll see houses on the screen, but I won't be referring to them. Some of the planets that are fast movers, in particular the moon moves about 12 degrees a day. And as you'll notice in Alysa Liu's chart, her moon is toward the end of Virgo. So tonight we're going to go on the assumption, because about 90% of the day that she was born, the moon was in Virgo. We're going to assume tonight that her moon is in Virgo. It is possible, a lot less likely though, possible that her moon sign is Libra, but we will talk about that tonight, but I wanted to throw that out there as well. Whenever you are looking at a chart for yourself and you see a chart with a 12 p.m. birth time, you should know that it is very likely that no birth time exists for this person. Now, for those of you interested in looking at your own chart, and you don't have a birth time, and you can't talk to anyone, mom, dad, anybody who would happen to know the birth time, at least here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, you can go to the Vital Records Department and get a long-form birth certificate, which does have your time of birth on it. I'm from Massachusetts originally, and all of the birth certificates, at least when I was born, had the time of birth on them. So some of them have it, some of them don't. Every state is a little different. In some cases, like Minnesota, the birth data is a matter of public record, and you could actually go get anybody's birth data who was born in Minnesota. But for tonight, we're going to be working with Alysa Liu's chart. She has a noontime chart. In addition to not having the houses, we also do not have a rising sign for her. The rising sign, as you may know, changes about once every 2 hours. So we can't have a rising sign. We don't have any houses. And the moon sign, again, is about 90% sure, but it's still a question. Okay. So let's look at what we do know, because there certainly are a lot of things that we can talk about tonight. So let's start with the sun first. Let me close in for you. But before we even get there, I should talk about the elemental balance. So over here on the right, you're going to see that we have a number of categories that are listed. And you'll see them over here on the right. I'm highlighting them. And they represent fire, earth, air, and water. They represent the number of planets that are in fire signs, earth signs, air signs, and water signs. Now, as I look at Alysa Liu's chart, that first column, you're going to see 4, 3, 2, and 1. So we happen to know that for, hi Dryad, nice to have you aboard, dear. You should know that when we're looking at the elemental balance of a chart, we're trying to figure out of what element is most prominent and least prominent. I'm going to circle the fact that we have one water sign planet in the chart. And the reason I'm going to do that is because we know that that particular planet's going to be important. It's the only water sign planet in astrology. We call that a singleton. And because it's a singleton, it's the only water sign planet in the chart, it gets extra attention. So immediately we're going to be looking at the water sign planet in the chart. And in this case, the water sign planet, the singleton, is actually going to be here, Alysa Liu's Uranus in Pisces. Okay. So that's the one planet that is a water sign planet. Wow, I cannot really draw stars tonight. Anyway, this planet is going to be important purely, for a lot of reasons, but purely because we have only that one water sign planet, and so it's going to stick out. So that's what we call an elemental singleton, a planet that shows up and it's the only planet that is in that particular element. Now, as we've talked about before, in astrology, every sign of the zodiac has two pieces. We have a element, which we just discussed, and we have a modality, cardinal, fixed, or mutable. Cardinal signs are the ones that begin every season. Fixed signs are the ones that anchor every season, and mutable signs are the ones that end every season and transition into the next one. So right now, for example, we are in the sun sign of Pisces. Pisces is a water sign, but it is a mutable. It is the mutable water sign. Every sign of the zodiac is a unique combination of one element and one quality. Okay. Now, in Alysa Liu's chart, we also have another singleton, but in this case, it's actually a modality singleton. It is cardinal. It is the one cardinal planet that she has. Okay? You're going to see it here. And that's important too, because if you have a lot of cardinal energy in a chart, you tend to have more of a leadership role. You tend to be more assertive. If you have more fixed energy, you tend to be more stubborn. You want to take on long-term projects. You want to develop things. If you have more mutable energy, you're much more of a follower type. Doesn't mean you can't lead, but it means that likely your job is going to be checking tasks off the list, and that's what you're going to be comfortable with. In Alysa Liu's chart, we have one cardinal sign. Again, it is one cardinal planet. It's a singleton. Let's show you which one it is. And it's going to be Jupiter in Libra. Libra is a cardinal sign. It's the sign that begins the fall. And so we have one planet that is in a cardinal sign. So the elemental balance is important, folks. What do we have a lot of? Well, we've talked about what we don't have, but what we have a lot of is fire energy. We have 4 fire planets here. And we have 5 planets in fixed signs. And this is something that is incredibly important. Okay. So we call Taurus, for example, the most fixed sign of the zodiac. There's a reason for that. It's because Taurus is by far the most determined. You could also use the term stubborn. Sorry, Taurus folks, but that's how we look at it. We're just going to call it the most fixed, okay? Depends on how you want to use the energy, but it's the most fixed sign of the zodiac. Fixed signs stick. They stay. They tend to have the same opinions. They tend to want to do the same things. They like routine. They like developing things. Those things are important to them. If I look at Alysa Liu's chart and see 5 fixed planets, 5 planets in fixed signs, folks, this is a very determined person. Half of the planets are in fixed signs. This is not a person whose determination or ability to reach a goal is in question. this is someone who is very driven, dogged, use your own adjective, but there it is. Okay, so we already know a lot about Alicia Liu, and that is that she is very assertive. She has a lot of fire energy. We've seen how she is on television. She's a very warm person. She's quite an assertive person, but she also is someone who is very driven and determined to get to her goal, which she did recently. Okay. So that's in a chart. One of the first things we want to look at is how the elements and the modalities are split up, because that helps us identify singleton planets. In this case, we have two. We have Uranus in Pisces, which is a water sign, and of course we have Jupiter in Libra, which is an air sign, but it is a cardinal air sign. Okay? So we got two singletons already to talk about. But let's see how far we get on her chart tonight. We have a lot of other things to talk about before we get there. So let's do it. All right. So let's go back to the sun. The sun is in Leo. Alicia Liu is a Leo sun person. Now, Leo is a sign that a lot of people know a lot about. So let's quickly go over some of the main characteristics of Leo, excuse me. Sorry, Libra people. Leo folks, okay? Leo is a sign whose energy comes from the sun. So when you have the sun in Leo, you have the most powerful sun sign there is. Now, sorry, Leo folks, most powerful does not mean the best, okay? It just means the most powerful. Leo people have a lot of sunny qualities. They tend to be very positive people. They tend to be people who are good at anything that involves being at the center of attention. That's a big, big quality for Leo folks. They're usually very comfortable with that. This includes, Leo also includes things like being good at drama or acting. They're particularly good at that. I call Leo the celebrity sign. Many famous celebrities, the one that comes to mind right away is Lucille Ball, for those of you who knew her, with her, especially with her fiery red hair, was a Leo person. And the symbol for Leo is interesting too, because if I close in on it here, you're going to see this is the symbol for Leo. And what it looks like is a little circle with a squiggle. That squiggle represents the Leo mane. Leo people take their hair very seriously. And as you've seen in pictures of Alicia Liu, Alicia's no exception. She has a great head of hair, and it was definitely on display, and you could tell it was a great style. It fit her perfectly. Leo is a sign that is very, very comfortable with their hair and want their hair to be front and center. And so when you talk about the Leo mane, that's what we talk about. And people who have Leo moon and Leo rising, in addition to Leo sun people, also tend to have great hair. Usually when I have clients who come into the shop or I meet them online, I can usually tell right away if there's something Leo in one of their big three. Okay? So we have someone who's a Leo sun. Now on the challenging side of Leo, because every sign has their good and bad points, folks, right? The challenge with Leo is the ego. Because when you're at the center of everything, and that's where you're used to being, when you're not there, you can get upset. Leo people throw fantastic temper tantrums, folks. I have never seen anybody throw a temper tantrum like a Leo. It's pretty impressive, especially when it's used the right way. And I say use the right way in the sense of getting something that you really, really need. This isn't a boy or girl who cried wolf scenario, because when you have a Leo person who's constantly shouting, that tends to lose its effect quite a bit. But for a Leo person who really picks the right time to have a proper meltdown, boy, it can be extremely effective in many scenarios. Leo folks do have a tendency to be comfortable with the spotlight, as I said, but it can also mean that they don't like being ignored. They take public rebuffs and snubs very personally. And if a Leo person leads with their ego, then that's going to cause a lot of problems. What you want to look for with the sign of Leo is very simple. The Leo person has to let their heart shine through. The sign of the zodiac that rules the heart is a Leo. And so if you see a Leo person's heart, good. If the Leo person is so concerned about the outer shell that they're not letting their heart show through, or there's a disconnect between what they do and who they are, it's going to become quite noticeable. And that's the main problem that we usually run into with Leo folks, is that they tend to try to be much more than they are because the insecurity inside pushes them in that direction. Okay? So what you want to keep in mind with Leo folks is that they are very, very sensitive, but they will never show that to you. Their heart is a very sensitive spot. And so I encourage you and the Leo people in your life, appreciate them appropriately. You have to give them the appropriate, what I would call, audience participation. When they're talking to you, really focus in, participate, engage with them. They like that. Leo is the sign of the zodiac that rules royalty also, and so many Leo people do think of themselves as the king or queen, and as such, they like giving advice. So use the Leo folks in your life for advice. They tend to be very good advice givers. Okay. So when we're talking about the Leo sun, this is the kind of thing we're talking about. Now again, there are 40 or 50 different characteristics on the positive and negative side for all the signs of the zodiac. As such, not every Leo is going to fit that, but that's a little bit of, with the Leo sun, what you can expect. Okay. Again, as long as Leo folks don't get in trouble with their ego, for the most part, they are extremely generous people that you want to be around because they tend to have a sunny disposition. Okay? You know that a Leo person is really struggling when they're morose or they're very, very down. That's very hard for Leo people to deal with. Okay? All right, so let's talk about Alysa in another way. So we have the sun that we've talked about. So we have a very strong sun in Leo. Now here, as you notice on the chart, we've talked about this before. This line up here is the midheaven of the chart. But again, the midheaven in this chart doesn't matter because we're using a 12 p.m. birth time because we don't have a birth time. We want the sun to be close to that midheaven when we're doing a chart for which we have no birth time. So this puts it right in the middle. Okay. Let's look at the moon next. So the moon, as you may or may not remember, is our emotional center. Okay. Alysa has the moon in Virgo. Again, it's about a 90% possibility that she's going to have the moon in Virgo, folks. If she were born very late in the day on her birthday, then perhaps it would be Libra. But likely, more likely than not, it's going to be a Virgo moon. So let's talk about that first, because the Virgo moon is one of the moon positions that can be challenging, and I'm going to explain why. Virgo is a sign that is very discriminating. It is very smart. Virgo is a Mercury-ruled sign, folks, and Mercury, the planet, rules the head. Oh, and happy Mercury retrograde, by the way, for those of you who might have forgotten. Mercury went retrograde last week. So hopefully you are enjoying the Mercury retrograde so far. And yes, Cozy Curls, absolutely. The Virgo moon can be very challenging because it's a Mercury-ruled sign. As I said, Mercury rules the head. Well, the moon's job is our emotions. And so people who have a Virgo moon have a tendency to put a layer of mental processing in between them and the emotion that they feel. Also, Virgo has a tendency to be perfectionistic. And so, if you think about it, as the emotion comes in, the Virgo moon person is usually trying to categorize it, analyze it, name it, what feeling it is, for example, like what exactly is it? But then, in addition, decide whether the feeling is proper or not. Now, the sign of Virgo, they say Virgo the Virgin, but folks, it has nothing to do with sexuality and has everything to do with purity. Okay, Virgo is a sign that likes purity, cleanliness, and good health, which is why Virgo people, many of them go into biology and life sciences. They go into medicine, they go into veterinary, they go into wellness of all kinds, because Virgo is the sign that deals with health and wellness. Okay, but Virgo also is a sign that is very discriminating, and they have a tendency to assign emotions in such a way in a Virgo moon that is almost this emotion is right and this emotion is wrong. And there are no emotions that are right or wrong, good people. It makes the challenge of the Virgo person to be able to step back, try to ignore the mental processing and just feel what they're going to feel. So it's not always easy to work with a Virgo moon. It can be very challenging. Also, because Mercury is, Virgo is a Mercury-ruled sign. When you have a lot of planets in Mercury-ruled signs, both Virgo and also in this case Gemini is the other planet that Mercury rules, there can be a tendency toward nervous system disorders. Anxiety is the one that comes to mind the most. But there are plenty of situations where that Mercury energy can make people quite anxious. Okay? So as we look at this chart and we think about the moon, remember that the moon's our emotional center. Alysa probably spends a lot of time figuring out what emotions are the right ones or the wrong ones, or tries to classify them. Hopefully what she'll realize, she's 20 now, hopefully as she gets older she'll realize that that process is by and large unnecessary, but that's what you often will come up with when you're dealing with someone who is a Virgo moon. Okay. All right, since we just talked about Mercury, let's look at Mercury next. And with Mercury, we're looking at Mercury in Leo. Now, as you can see, we also, just as an aside, we have Mercury and the Sun that are within 7 degrees of each other. And we call that in astrology a conjunction. And because Mercury has to stay within 28 degrees of the Sun in any chart, that's why we will often see Sun-Mercury conjunctions. I call that the information junkie. Okay, this is someone who likes information, likes learning about things, wants to talk, wants to gossip, someone who's very curious. We often see that for Sun-Mercury conjunctions. In any case, let's focus back on the Mercury. Mercury is in Leo. So this is someone who wants to express themselves in a bold way. Mercury is about communication. Mercury is about self-expression. Mercury is about memory. Okay, so when you have Mercury in Leo, you're looking at someone who is probably very open about who they are. Someone who is wants to talk about themselves in a very proud way. Someone who wants to communicate in a dynamic way with passion. Someone who wants to be noticed for communicating. Okay, this isn't someone who's going to want to sit back and say nothing. This is not a wallflower sort of placement. This is a wonderful placement for people who want to get their thoughts and feelings out into the world by talking about them, or generally speaking, communicating about them. Now, Mercury, as we know, is the planet of communication. Now, communication isn't just verbal, folks. It's any transmission or receipt of a message. So that includes telephone, for those of you who still use the phone, email, text messaging, social media, anywhere that anything that transmits or receives a signal is under Mercury's rule. And so the Leo energy is going to permeate all of the ways that she expresses herself. Okay? Also, because Mercury rules the memory, Mercury in Leo means that likely Alysa is going to remember those times positively where she was the center of attention and where she was recognized. Okay, again, Leo is a sign that usually does very well when they are recognized and applauded and nurtured in a public way. Now, for those of you who are looking at the chart closely, we have this little tiny symbol at the very end, right here. And this is the symbol for retrograde. So we know that Alicia Liu has a Mercury retrograde in her chart. Cozy Curls, you're asking me about arrogance more probable with the Sun-Mercury conjunction. I would say that if we're talking about Leo, maybe. In other signs, probably not. But I have not seen Sun-Mercury conjunction in Leo to necessarily lead to arrogance. If it was in the first house, or if it was very prominent, and because we don't know what house it is here, we really can't say, but I would be looking at the house placement for that, as well as the sign. So honestly, with Sun-Mercury in Leo, I mean, it's possible, but in this particular chart, I haven't seen anything that would lead me in that direction. Okay? Hope that answers your question, but thank you. So we have Mercury retrograde here. Now we're in a Mercury retrograde right now. About 20% of people have Mercury retrograde in their natal charts, folks. It's not rare. It's pretty common. As you know, or I can repeat it for you, Mercury is retrograde 3 times a year for about 3 weeks at a time. Some years, it's 4 times a year. And I know a lot of you people out there are going, oh, no, 3 is enough. Mercury retrograde in a natal chart really means that a person's communication style is turned more inward rather than outward. Okay? So while I would normally say that a person with Mercury in Leo might be more outspoken, Alicia Liu is probably less so because she has that Mercury turned inward. It is retrograde. Retrograde means it was going backward in the zodiac during the time that she was born. Okay? When you are dealing with someone with a natal Mercury retrograde, you need to make sure that you're allowing them the opportunity to communicate, that you are encouraging them to communicate. They need to be talking about what's going on in their head. Remember that Mercury is the planet that rules the brain, folks. So about 90% of the things that someone could say when you're talking about a Mercury retrograde natal person with a natal Mercury retrograde, 90% of that stuff stays up here, and the rest of us don't even hear about it. In the mind of the person with a Mercury retrograde, you could almost see a Chiron at the bottom of the screen with what their thoughts are. So we need to encourage Mercury retrograde people to express themselves fully, especially when we're in romantic or intimate relationships with them, when we're close friends with them. The closer we are to someone, the more important we need to encourage them to communicate. Okay? So the natal Mercury retrograde is a very interesting wrinkle here. Now, for those of you dealing with transiting Mercury retrograde right now, it's important for us all to remain calm during Mercury retrograde. Right now, Mercury is retrograding through Pisces. And so for us, we need to make sure that we're doing a good job communicating our thoughts, our emotions, our needs during this time in a very basic and clear way. This is not a time to have a very important conversation about, for example, the future of a relationship, or I probably wouldn't ask for a raise right now. Certain conversations are probably better had when Mercury is direct. However, when it comes to things like job interviews, I've had clients ask me, should I not take a job interview because Mercury's in retrograde? Absolutely not. It's a job interview. You go and you try to be very cognizant of what you're saying, how you're saying it, and what you're being asked, even more than you normally would in an interview situation. Okay? So with Mercury retrograde in the natal chart, Alicia is probably a lot less communicative than perhaps we would normally see with someone with Mercury in Leo. All right, let's take a look at what's next. Let's look at Venus in Virgo. Over here, conjunct the moon. And again, we're talking about under 7 degrees apart. So this is what I would consider kind of a wide conjunction. Okay, it's not particularly strong, but for Alysa Liu, she has Venus in Virgo. Venus is the planet of values. A lot of people think of her as the love planet, but she's also the love and money planet. She does both. She's our values, what's important to us. Okay? Now this is where things are really going to start to get interesting when it comes to her skating, because we have Venus in Virgo. Venus in Virgo, like the moon in Virgo, can be quite challenging because there is a perfectionist streak with Virgo that can sometimes come out with Venus in Virgo. Okay? And it's because the Venus in Virgo person, what they value are things that are potentially perfect for them. In other words, they're not really prepared to compromise on what they want. It's like, this is exactly how I want it. Now, when you're talking about relationships, it is very, very hard to be able to say, this person meets my needs perfectly. And so when we're dealing with Venus in Virgo, we also are dealing with someone whose self-esteem might also not be the greatest, because Virgo is always looking for the problems. Virgo is probably the most critical sign of the zodiac. And as such, when a Virgo Venus person is looking at themselves, they likely don't see the beauty first. They likely see the flaws first. And so hopefully, and it seemed like it, but hopefully Alysa has figured out that it's so important for her to appreciate who she is with all her flaws, and that her ability to shine is far greater than any of the flaws that she keeps within. And again, Virgo is a Mercury ruled sign, and so these are things that can get in your head. Okay, Venus in Virgo is a very cerebral Venus, and so the challenge here is trying to look at life not as what's wrong with this picture, but being able to appreciate the idea of I am a work in progress. Okay, that every person is a work in progress, but the Venus in Virgo person may feel it more keenly than others. I will also say, though, that Venus is the planet of beauty and grace. And certainly, if you've seen Alysa Liu skate, she's incredible. This perfectionist Venus in Virgo, this perfectionist streak that we have, probably really helps when it comes to her skating, because she wants to get it perfect. She wants to get it exactly right, as only Virgo can do. Okay. Now again, it's connected to the moon. So this is someone who's going to be very comfortable when they do everything right. It also means that she could tend to be more uncomfortable when she doesn't do something exactly right. Good enough is probably not something that is in Alysa Liu's vocabulary quite often. She probably works very hard to make sure that everything she does is perfect. All right, let's go to Mars next. Now, Mars is of particular importance in this chart because Mars deals with physical activity. So in astrology, Mars deals with anything that rules the physical body. Venus and Mars work together. Venus says, here's what I want, and Mars says, I'm going to get it. Okay? I like to call Mars the dumb jock of the zodiac. He's not smart, but he's important because he deals with our physical body. That's also why in astrology we separate love and physical intimacy. Those two things are different. Mars deals with the physical intimacy piece. Venus deals with the love piece. Okay? So we keep those two things separate. But this is someone who is a professional athlete. And as such, when you're dealing with athletics, Mars is a super, super important planet to work with. So we have Mars and Taurus here. Okay, if you were to look up Mars and Taurus, you would likely see a lot of things like, oh, it's not very good, it's not very strong. And to be fair, it's not. And it's because Mars is in a sign whose power comes from Venus. I sometimes call Mars and Taurus the linebacker in a tutu, okay? Because Mars is in a sign that it is not comfortable with at all, okay? It would be like telling someone to go fight and then having the person say, yeah, I'd rather just sit here and have a drink, or I'd rather sit here and sit down and have a nice meal with this person. Can we do that? Mars and Taurus would, in many cases, rather not get off the couch. Okay, Taurus is a sign that wants comfort. It's Venus ruled. So you see the disconnect? Mars and Taurus, when it comes up in a chart, can be very challenging for motivation and for physical activity. Now, you're thinking, John, did you see her skate? How could you say that? It's like, yeah, I saw her skate and she's amazing. And lazy is certainly not a word that came to mind when I was watching her perform. In this particular case, we have what's called a planet in detriment. Mars is in its detriment in Taurus, which means it starts off 2 lengths behind everybody else. But with a planet in detriment, if you work at it, no matter what the planet is, if you work at it, you can make more progress than people who have Mars in a very powerful sign to start. It's like being very talented at something or having to really work at it. Now, remember earlier I was saying how Taurus is the most fixed sign of the zodiac, determined / stubborn? I need you to think about the determination that is possible with someone with Mars in Taurus. This is a person who is never going to give up. When it comes to physical activity, athletics, this is a person who's going to do it over and over and over again. And again, remember, we have Venus in Virgo. They're going to redo it and redo it and redo it and redo it until it's perfect. Okay? This is, on paper, this looks like it's a problem. But a number of times I've said, it's all about how you use the energy in the chart. Okay? Alysa Liu has taken that Mars and Taurus and really, really used it to her benefit because she practices hard, she's very determined, and she wants things to be perfect. And what is interesting is that Taurus is, as I said a moment ago, a Venus-ruled sign. And so Venus deals with beauty. So what is she trying to do? She's working toward something that is beautiful. She's determined to make something that's beautiful and graceful. And so when you're looking at your chart, and especially, ladies and gentlemen, if you're looking at your own chart and going, oh, I have a planet in detriment, that's awful. You have the opportunity to work with that planet so that it can benefit you. Alysa Liu has definitely done that. And that's a good lesson for all of us because we all have planets that kind of suck. I know I do. I've got 2 planets in detriment. So over the years, I've had to work on those planets, whatever area those planets are in, or cover, I should say, and that helps you make them better. I can tell you I'm living proof of it. It can take a while, but it's important to understand that when you start with a chart, your chart, anybody's chart, it's where you start and not where you finish that's important. And obviously, Alysa Liu could be quite lazy. And maybe when she's not skating, she is. I hope that she is, considering how much work she does in her skating life. Hopefully when she's off, she does nothing. Okay? But with Mars and Taurus, we might not start off great, but with the determination that comes with Mars and Taurus, you can see where it's gone. Okay? Now we have another interesting piece of the puzzle here, and I'm going to talk about the sun again, only this time we're going to talk about the sun's relationship to another planet, which is Neptune. Now, as Cozy Curls will tell you, astrology can get pretty nerdy, okay? When you start getting into degrees and math and angles, that's when astrology goes from, haha, that's kind of fun, to, you sure I want to work with this? Because this seems pretty complicated. My certification exam for astrology was harder than my master's exam, folks, and I'm not kidding, okay? But I say all that to you because if you look at the degree, the number, right? Every sign of the zodiac has 30 degrees. When Alysa Liu was born, her sun was at 16 degrees of Leo. Let's go over to the other side. When she was born, Neptune was at 16 degrees of Aquarius. These two planets are almost exactly 180 degrees apart. This is really interesting because an opposition that is that tight, you're going to notice this is 16 minutes, this is 16 degrees 12 minutes, this is 16 degrees 19 minutes. These two planets are only 7 minutes off from being exactly 180 degrees, which almost never happens astrologically. Okay? This is what we call in the astrology world an extremely tight opposition. What does that mean day to day? It means that this Sun-Neptune opposition is extremely important in this person's chart. Let's talk about why. Neptune, first of all, it's interesting to note that Neptune is the planet that rules water. And, well, as an athlete, she skates on frozen water. I mean, let's just start with that. Sometimes astrology gets pretty literal. Okay. Neptune is the planet that deals with the arts and music and dance, and all of what she does is incorporated in there. Neptune is a very creative planet. It's also a very spiritual planet. Okay. Neptune is a planet that's very intuitive. With this connection, likely Alysa Liu is quite intuitive. Likely. The challenge with Neptune is that Neptune can obscure. Neptune can hide things. Neptune can keep secrets. Neptune is also the planet of addiction. Okay? So when we're dealing with someone with such a strong Sun-Neptune opposition, we know that Neptune is going to be very important in this chart. Now, what does it do for Alysa Liu? It gives her an incredible artistic and creative ability. And if you've seen her skate, you can see it, okay? She is incredibly, incredibly talented, not just as an athlete, but the grace and beauty that she uses when she performs. And Neptune is a higher octave of Venus, good people, which means that a lot of the qualities of Venus, those that are at a higher level, more spiritual, are contained in Neptune, okay? So this Sun-Neptune opposition is, for her, one of the most important aspects, relationships between planets, in this chart, without a doubt. And she would likely not be as good a skater as she is without it. Okay? Super, super important here. But that Sun-Neptune opposition is vital to what she's trying to do. Absolutely vital. Okay. Let's take a look at Saturn, because we haven't talked about Saturn yet. And we have Saturn in Leo. Now, Saturn was the furthest planet out that we could see with the naked eye before we invented telescopes. Okay? So for a long time, the ancients had 7 planets, and Saturn was the last one they could see. Because Saturn is so far out, and because Saturn was a cold, dry planet, he was considered the anti-sun and the anti-moon. Okay? He's the Grim Reaper. You've heard me talk about this before. We made him into the Grim Reaper, folks. Okay? He's the one who says your time is done. In this chart, because Alysa Liu has Saturn in a sun-ruled sign, Leo, once again, we have a planet that's in detriment. Again, detrimental planets are there at the start, but you choose how you work with them. So let's look at another relationship in the chart. Before I go though, Saturn's job, remember, is long-term goals, boundaries, staying focused, staying on track. He's the planet of adulting. Okay? So let's take a look at this interesting facet of the chart. We talked about relationships between planets, right? And we talked about how Alysa Liu has this planet in detriment over here with Mars, right? Mars and Taurus. Look at the relationship between Saturn and Mars. It's almost a 90-degree angle. We call that in astrology a square. When planets are at about a 90-degree angle to one another, there's some friction. There are some challenges involved between the two planets. Saturn is a planet that we often see for people who have to do the same thing over and over again. We often see it in the chart of scientists and doctors, for example, who have to redo experiments over and over again. We see it in the charts of musicians who have to practice over and over again, and athletes too. Okay, when you have to do something, make a long-term commitment to something, Saturn is the guy you want. Folks, I love Jupiter too, but Jupiter's not going to stick around long enough to get long-term projects done. You want to work with Saturn for that. In Alysa Liu's chart, you're going to see that there is a connection between Saturn and Mars. That friction, we call them hard aspects, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Hard aspects, the opposition and the square in particular, are things that help push you forward if you use the energy that way. They push you. Well, so look what we've got. We've got somebody who is extremely motivated in the physical body, right? Someone who pushes and pushes and pushes. And we combine that with the tension of a planet that wants long-term goals. This is another powerhouse aspect in this chart, because in addition to giving her the physical drive to do what she does, Saturn gives us the long-term focus to say, nope, you got to do it again. Nope, you've got to do it again. Yeah. And Cozy Curls, yes, I'm curious too if she came back from her hiatus when transiting Uranus was early in Taurus. For those of you who don't know, Uranus is about to go into Gemini, and Uranus spends about 7 years in a sign. Well, Uranus has been in Taurus for the last 7 years or so. And it would be really interesting when Uranus showed up around here in Alicia's chart and made this connection, and we're wondering if maybe that's when she decided to come back from the hiatus she had taken from skating. That would definitely be an interesting thing to look at another night to get an idea of when that happened. Okay, but this gives you an idea about how astrologers kind of try to time things. In any case, with this connection, when you have something that is making a connection to one planet, it's also going to affect the other planet if the two planets are connected by an aspect. And so as things affect Mars, they also have an echo on Saturn, and vice versa. So Saturn and Mars are well connected in this chart, and so this is a powerhouse combination for someone who has to do the same physical activity over and over again, with the two planets in Virgo to drive the perfectionism, to make it perfect. Okay? So this chart is very, very well set up for someone who wants to do long-term sports. Now, does it mean that someone with this chart is going to be another Alysa Liu? No. Remember, it's all about how we live the chart, at what level we are living the chart. In Alysa Liu's case, she is really taking advantage of everything she has astrologically, and obviously it's been a success. She's done very well. But yeah, that Saturn-Mars connection, in addition to the Sun-Neptune connection, are both really helpful for what she is choosing to do. Now, if we had a chart with houses on it, we could look at the midheaven and we could see what her career looks like. We could see vocational potential. Obviously, we don't have that, so we can't. It's disappointing. A lot of the charts that we look at are not going to have a birth time. I really wish we could get a birth time for this one, folks. Unfortunately, we don't. But what you do find in charts of athletes is that many of them have Mars angular, meaning in the first house, the fourth house, the seventh house, and more importantly, up here in the 10th house or right behind the 10th house. Okay? I often see people who are athletes who have that set up. And speaking of Mars, it's not just athletes, folks. It's anyone who uses their body as part of their career. This is law enforcement folks. This is soldiers. This is bodybuilders, in addition to athletes. Okay? Because Mars is about the physical body. Mars also rules anybody who works with tools. So we often see Mars prominent in surgeons as well. Okay? Now, of course, we're almost out of time, and there's always more you can say about a chart. But I hope that this has given you some idea of how astrology works in the day-to-day. I hope it's given you a look at planets that might not be particularly good at the start, but obviously Alysa Liu has done very well in using her astrological energy to get the things done that she wants to get done. I am very curious to see what happens to her in the future. I'm going to be following her career. Hopefully someday she'll give us her birth time. I would absolutely love that, just for our curiosity's sake. But I'm happy to take any questions about what we've discussed tonight, if anyone has any. Okay. Well, I want to thank all of you for joining me tonight for this live stream. For the record, I am happy to look at other charts that people find interesting. I'm a big fan of the true crime stuff, so I often revert to things like serial killers. But I wanted to do something a little more uplifting this week, especially since this is a person who has really triumphed and has had a lot of different challenges in her life, and obviously she's overcome quite a few of them, and she's really amazed us as overall. So anyway, as I said earlier, I sincerely appreciate you being here with me tonight. This is going to be recorded, so you'll have the opportunity to watch it again if you wish. And I look forward to seeing you next week for another chart. Once again, if you have suggestions for me, I am very, very happy to have them. And I thank you as always for your attention. Bye now.